Oh my god, this movie was not good at all. I'm gonna throw my usual review formula in the garbage for this review, because this movie was so bad that I needed to alter my entire review process just to make this video. This is going to be more of a rant type video instead of a full-on review, just because this movie was that bad. But without further delay, let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the bad character designs again. Megatron looks awful in this movie, and I really miss his old look, even if he didn't need to be in this movie at all. I do not understand why they had to change their character designs, because they looked so good in the original movies. I would say that the only character that looks good now is Bumblebee, and that is it. A lot of the Transformers didn't even look like Transformers that would transform into a vehicle anymore. They just look like robots. So we are introduced to this kid, and I really didn't like this character at all. Her name is Isabella, and I feel like she is the most useless character in this entire movie. They try to make us feel bad for her because her family was killed by the Decepticons, so now she's a loner who likes to protect the Autobots. But I have no feelings for this character, and I'll now mention why she was useless in this movie. She had to get everybody else to do the things she wanted to do, and she was always in the way, and when they needed to be stealth, she was the only one who would bring attention to them. I really do not know why she was even in this movie, because this movie could have done a lot better without her. Even though she wasn't in it for very long, she was still a character that was utterly useless. Why was Optimus Prime so quick to take orders from the Maker? Holy shit, you would think that Optimus Prime is a lot smarter than that. Sure, maybe if the Maker had a curse put on him or something, then maybe that could have worked, but it was mentioned nowhere that that was the thing she could do. At the same time, Optimus Prime being evil is just weird. It just felt like a forced twist in this movie, because I remember that in the trailer for this movie, it showed Optimus Prime fighting Bumblebee, and so everybody was obviously curious as to why that was happening. So that was the main attraction to this movie. I would have felt ripped off if I went to the theaters for this, because to have a forced twist like that, just to get people to come to the movie, is a shitty thing, and should not be done. The comedy does not seem to work as well in this movie. They try to seem a lot more humorous in this movie, and for me, it just does not work. Like, it did work for the first few movies, and now it's just starting to drag on and on. Were there some funny parts? Yes. But for the majority of the movie, the jokes just did not land. And I feel like they should have been a lot more smart about it. The only character that I actually found funny was Jimmy, as well as the butler. Those were the only characters that actually made me laugh. Otherwise, the humor is just garbage. They tried to do this quirky thing where they tried to introduce our main villains in a comedic way, and it did not work. When you think about it, it's kind of like the Suicide Squad, the way they did it in 2016. So that means that this was probably taken from that movie and put into this movie. They introduce a character in a quirky way, show off something bad that they did, and have the government agents be like, "Oh, we can't do that." Then the bad guy is like, "Yes, you can." And then it just does not work for me, and it feels like they're blatantly copying the Suicide Squad. They tried to have too many emotional scenes in this movie that just did not land. What I mean by this is the fact that the kid is introduced into this movie, who is Isabella, and Cade at first does not like her. That makes sense, fine. But then less than half an hour later, he thinks that she is part of his family now, even though they have barely talked, and when they did talk, they always disagreed about something. This would have worked if we were introduced to this character in the last movie, and then they went through the struggle of all that, and then they finally started to get along in this movie. That would have worked a lot better. Somehow, Cybertron is still intact and traveling to Earth. This is one of the stupidest things about this movie, and I don't understand why they don't seem to coherently write these movies to be back to back, because this feels like an entirely different reality now. I thought Cybertron was originally destroyed in the war. You can say that, well, why didn't you mention that in the movie review for the third Transformers movie? Well, that's because I didn't really think about it and notice. My problem with this is that they tried to bring back Cybertron so many times in this film series. This plan has failed over and over again, and you're telling me that all this time the maker could have just traveled to Earth with Cybertron and all her minions? The implications of this means that the last 4 or 5 movies have meant literally nothing because they could have just traveled to Earth with Cybertron. Then why did they have to do that in the first place? So at the beginning of the movie, we were introduced to this character named Vivian, and we only see her for the first couple of minutes, then we don't see her for another hour. Suddenly, then we're given her entire storyline, and we're supposed to feel bad for her and feel a connection to this person, and yet that doesn't work because we weren't formally introduced to this character since we got to an hour in this movie before we get to see her. If you want us to feel a connection to a certain person in the movie, you do not introduce them an hour into the movie, because then you won't have enough time with the character to actually feel a connection. I mentioned in previous reviews for the series that I like the fact that they were able to intertwine the Transformers into historic events. In this movie, they go too far. I say this because it seemed like the Transformers were somehow related in every single historical event that has ever happened in the history of humans. I understand having the aliens involved every once in a while in major events, but to say that aliens were involved in every single historic event is a bit far-fetched for me. I say this because if they had a part in every single historic event, then wouldn't have somebody figured out that at some point and realized, wait a minute, there are literal aliens in these pictures, and they should be released to the press. I find it very hard to believe that not a single image leaked of the aliens. So, I guess Bumblebee was in World War II. Wouldn't this have come up way earlier in the series instead of the final movie? This is so irritating to me, because it clearly messes with the timeline here, because we were supposed to assume that Bumblebee originally arrived on planet Earth in 2007, not 1940. I'm not saying that's when he arrived on Earth, I'm just saying that to make a point. I really am trying to understand why this came up, because this messes up the timeline so much, because they showed proof in the first Transformers movie that he came from space right there and then, and I don't know why they're doing that. I'm gonna have to be straight up and say, this movie was boring. This was the most boring Transformers movie out of all of them. Everything from the action to the story, as well as everything else, has just been done so many times in this series that now it just feels like they're copying and pasting everything. I know it's the same director, but we need to have some sort of dynamic range in the way these movies are shown, because having it filmed the same way as well as the story going the same way is just irritating. I don't know guys, I used to love Michael Bay, but after seeing this entire franchise, I don't know if I enjoy his movies anymore. Why is it that in order to save Optimus Prime, Bumblebee speaks with his real voice, but then later on in the movie, his voice is broken again? So how in the heck did his voice get broken again? Can we not, for once, have consistency in this franchise? What also makes it funnier is that he talks yet again with his normal voice at the end of the movie. The action is not good. This kind of comes back to the boring part of this movie. I hate to say this, because I love action, but there is too much action in this movie. It's not too much per se, but it's the same type of action that is really not great. In the first 3 Transformers movies, there were a lot of good fight scenes between the Autobots and Decepticons, because we really got to see them fight hand to hand and brutally beat each other. Now all we see is them shooting at each other and having stupid dialogue in between. There is no actual substance to the action here. Now, I feel like it's just for pure spectacle and to show how much of a budget that they really have. Because now we've got dragons flying everywhere, dinosaurs, as well as planets colliding into each other. You would think that was a bunch of scenes throughout the whole movie, but no, that was only one scene in this movie. You see what I mean? There's just too much action at one time, and you need to pace it, because people are either going to get confused or are going to zone out. because there's just so much to look at that you can't possibly know what's happening, and it's really annoying. I know this review wasn't as long, but I just wanted to get this over with, to be quite honest with you. This was by far the worst Transformers movie I have ever seen, and it's a goddamn disgrace to the Transformers franchise. I'm giving this movie a 2 out of 10 because this movie is horrible. I'm giving it this score because the story is all over the place, they introduced us to unlikable characters, and the action is just too much, as well as the movie being plain boring. Yes, there are a few comedic scenes, and some characters that I did like, but in the end, that does not excuse the absolute pile of dog shit this movie is. I am happy that I no longer have to watch any more Transformers movies, because this series is gone down the toilet. Anyways, the next movie I will be reviewing is the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. Please let me know in the comments section below on what you thought about this movie, and please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next review.